me, would y'all mind watching my backpack? You're right.
They're like, yes. I mean, no. I mean, that seat's taken. Sorry, it's been a long. I apologize.
That's my movie, man. We love that movie. Sit down, man. What's that?
Everybody, just a moment to get mic'd up here. Before we begin, please let me extend a welcome to you. My name is David Pryor. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School of Government. For those of you who are visiting us this Friday afternoon, especially for the first time in our forum, we want to say a hearty welcome to you. This afternoon we have a very, very distinguished panel. And we will introduce that, or the panel will be introduced to you in just a moment. But before then, to introduce that distinguished panel, and the subject, is there a National Latino Agenda? We have one of the Kennedy School's own and one of the Kennedy School's best. And that person is, of course, Virginia Mosqueda. She is a Master's in Public Policy student. I think you have your own fan club here, Virginia. Before Virginia came to the Kennedy School of Government, she was in Orange County, and she was the director of a after-school program in Orange County, California. She is a Californian, and we have some Californians today on the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome your colleague, Virginia Mosqueda. Virginia.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos. Welcome and good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to kind of be up here amongst my peers and this distinguished panel that we have up here. I wanted to mention that the forum is part of the 5th Annual Latino Law and Public Policy Conference. And this year's theme is the topic of tonight's discussion, which is there a National Latino Agenda? And students and the leaders who will be here with us over the weekend, we strongly believe that this is a pressing and important issue, especially with the changing demographics across the country, not only in California or Texas, which we normally think are the states that have large proportions of Latinos, but now it's the South, it's the Midwest. So this is the reason why we decided to focus on this particular topic this year. I would like to, again, it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Pedro Nogueira, who is the Judith K. Pedro, the education school, or like, he has his own fan club too. And Pedro Nogueira, who's at the, he is the professor of it's the Judith K. Diamond Professor of Community and Schools at the School of Education. His interests are, or his research focus is urban schools, improving and understanding urban schools. But let me go ahead and pass the mic to him.
I think that I have a mic. Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to serve as the moderator of this distinguished panel on this important topic. Let me start with just a few comments just to frame our discussion. First, for those who've been looking at the results of the 2000 census as they've been released, it's clear now that Latinos constitute not only the fastest growing ethnic minority group in the country, but also are probably now the largest ethnic minority group, although there's some debate about that, about exactly when that will occur. And what's more is that if you look at where Latinos are located, Latinos are no longer located where they traditionally were, right, which California, Florida, New York, Illinois. My colleague Marcelo Suarez Orozco likes to point out that half of the students in Dodge City, Kansas today are of Mexican descent. So Kansas isn't Kansas anymore. This is an incredibly diverse population, consisting of people of whose origins are from throughout Latin America, different races, different ethnicities. It includes people like Sammy Sosa and people like Jose Canseco, right, as well as people of Chinese descent that come from places like Cuba and Panama. So it is an incredibly diverse population with different political interests and different generational issues that come up from depending upon when they migrated to the United States. And so you see those differences show up, particularly in places like California and Texas. So one of the questions we're going to explore today is, given these differences, to what extent can there be an agenda that would represent such a diverse group of people? It's helpful when we think about this to also make some comparisons to other ethnic minority groups and the ways in which they have used politics as a way to forge their interest in this country. Irish Americans, who are quite powerful still in this area, once were a discriminated group and used unions and the Democratic Party to take control of cities throughout the country. In some cases, still control those cities. In fact, it was one of the jokes was the first African American to be elected to the school committee in Boston only got elected because his last name was O'Brien, and people didn't see the picture. But politics clearly has served as a way to advance Irish Americans to the point where Irish America is no longer seen as a minority group in this country, and it's often the case that people don't think of the Irish as a group that were ever discriminated against. Likewise, African Americans have used civil rights movement to advance political agenda, to make great gains in representation at both the local congressional level. And there has been, at least at times, some degree of coherence about what an African American agenda consists of, although clearly many debates within that agenda. So today what we're going to try to do is to imagine what an agenda for Latinos looks like. Given both the newness of this population, it should be pointed out that over 25% of Latinos are under the age of 18. So this is a young population, far younger than most other demographic groups in the nation. And so clearly a group that's going to have an impact for years to come. So first, let me introduce our panelist. Seated to my left is Ruben Navarrate. Ruben is from Washington, D.C. He serves as the Deputy Assistant to President Bush and the Director of White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. He was appointed by President Bush to this position in March 2001, and he serves as the primary liaison between the President and the nation's governors, state legislators, county and city governments, as well as various other governmental bodies. Prior to his service at the White House, Mr. Navarrate was the President and CEO of Joint Venture, a Silicon Valley network and a regional civic organization of business executives, state and local government leaders promoting tax, fiscal, and economic policies that are important to the region. Mr. Navarrate was the first elected Latino to the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors and served for 6 members as president and as president for 1. He's the son of Mexican immigrants, and Mr. Navarrate has been recognized by Hispanic Business Magazine as one of the 100 most influential Hispanics in the United States. Welcome. To Ruben's left is Antonio Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez is the President and General Counsel of MALDEF, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund. MALDEF is a nonprofit litigation advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights of the nation's 35 million Latinos through the legal system, community education, research, and policy initiatives. She was elected president in 1985, and she directs all litigation and advocacy programs, manages a $6.2 million budget, a 75-person staff, as well as MALDEF's regional offices. Ms. Hernandez began her career as a staff attorney with the Los Angeles Center for Law and Justice and counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee before joining MALDEF in 1981 as a regional counsel in Washington, D.C. Ms. Hernandez sits on a variety of advisory boards, committees, and panels, including the Senior Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics. To her left, we have Ruben Navarrate, who is no stranger to the Kennedy School because he graduated from here in the year 2000 from the mid-career program. He is a columnist and an editorial board member of the Dallas Morning News. In January 2001, his twice-a-week column became nationally syndicated, making Mr. Navarrete one of the handful of Latino syndicated columnists in the country. He is a contributing editor to Newsweek and political editor of Oye magazine, a Los Angeles-based Latino men's magazine. In addition to some work in television and talk radio, Mr. Navarrete's work frequently appears in the Los Angeles Times, Arizona Republic, Fresno Bee, as well as Latino publications such as Latina, Hispanic, Swing, and Politico magazines. Mr. Navarrete is also author of A Darker Shade of Crimson, Odyssey of a Harvard Chicano, and a contributor to the newest installment of Chicken Soup for the Writer's Soul. Finally, we have Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, batting cleanup on this panel. Congresswoman Sanchez was first elected in 1996. She serves the citizens of Orange County, California, making a point to travel back and forth from Washington each weekend so that she maintains accessibility to her constituents. She sits on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce and the House Armed Services Committee. Representative Sanchez uses her power in both of these positions to help her constituents, whether by promoting educational initiatives or bringing high-tech, defense-related jobs to her district. Prior to serving in Congress, Representative Sanchez worked in business before starting her own consulting firm, specializing in assisting public agencies and private firms with their finances. She's looking to be re-elected to her fourth term this November, while also hoping to have her sister, Linda, follow in her footsteps in her race in California's 39th Congressional District. If successful, they will be the first sisters to serve together in the history of the U.S. Congress.
Sister Act.
Quite a feat. So, my role today is to actually pose the questions, and once I heard I get to pose the questions, I really delighted in this role. So I want to start by asking the panelists about the possibilities for agenda given, our Latino agenda, given the diversity of Latinos. That is there a set of issues that would speak to Dominicans in New York, Mexicans in Dodge City, Tejanos in San Antonio, Cubans in Miami? Given this diversity, is there an agenda that, and what would be some of the issues that you'd see on that agenda?
Obviously, I think the top issue would be education. I mean, overarching, and quality education, one that makes sure you actually honestly deal with the achievement gap that Latino children often fall into, and develop strategies to bridge that gap and get Latinos in proportion to the population, or in proportion to the general population, graduating from high school, moving on to four-year universities, and getting senior positions in government and in industry. And then that would lead to the second priority, which would be what we would refer to as economic security, making sure that there are jobs in a competitive environment that Latinas can compete for and take part in. And if I had to develop a national strategy for the Latino community in the United States, it would focus on those two issues.
So, thank you. Antonia.
Well, I think to answer this question, you really have to sort of deal with the stereotypes of Latinos. I mean, one stereotype is that we cannot get along, that we have nothing in common. And then, of course, the other stereotype is that we're all one and that there is no dissimilarity. And both don't fit the Latino community. The Latino community, if you think of it, is like an umbrella. Okay? There are commonalities, common values, common culture, common language, and unfortunately, common social economic issues. Within those commonalities, there's a lot of differences. So the real issue is, do we build on our commonalities, acknowledging our differences, so that we can advance politically and economically and socially, or do we, as in the past, sort of concentrate on the differences? My position is that, yeah, there is this common bond between Dominicano, Colombiano, Guatemalteco, Salvadoreño, Mexicano. Unfortunately for us is language. It's, to a large degree, immigrant status. About 50% of Latinos, whether it's themselves or their children, of our immigrant roots. We're talking about poverty, unfortunately, and not every Latino's poor. That's not what I want to say, but poverty. As Ruben said, education. I think that we're making political advances but we have a long ways to go. And so our agenda, or Maldives' agenda, is how do we build on those commonalities and help our community integrate successfully into American society. And to that, there has to be a lot of discussions, and I can speak to, and others will speak to, that on the issues, there are a lot of commonalities.
Ruben.
First, I have to say it's nice to be back. And I have to say also to commend all of you for the amount of work that it takes to put something like this on, because I know firsthand, having been a part of the Latino Public Policy and Law program 2 years ago, it's an enormous undertaking. I also want to commend all of you for just being here, because given what I do, we would all agree that this is a hugely important issue, knowledge of which is essential to be a good leader. And just my own 2 cents is, if you go through Harvard twice, and I've gone through it twice, and you don't get an understanding for what America looks like now, you need to go down to the Term Bill office and demand a refund, because you are not, at that point, educated and prepared to deal with the reality of America outside those doors. So I commend you all for being here. You absolutely have to get ahead of this curve, and I think you're there. In terms of answering the question, I'd say outreach is the #1 thing to bring together. I agree with everything that's been said so far in terms of the issues that resonate. But I think that if you're building a national agenda, one thing that will resonate with all Hispanics, all different types of Latinos, is the idea of making an overture, of staging some sort of outreach effort to bring them into the tent. I think about what Bill Clinton did with the gay community in 1992. He went forward and said, listen, I have a vision for America and you're part of it. That's all it took. You know, gays and lesbians threw the support around Bill Clinton, and that's all people want. That's all what Latinos want. They want it from Republicans, they want it from Democrats. They don't want to be taken for granted by one party, written off by another. They want to be included, and they want that outreach. If you have, for instance, I think this will happen. I think George Bush will use his first vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court to put a Hispanic on the court. He'll do in one try what Bill Clinton failed to do in 2 tries. And we'll have to struggle with that, all you Democrats and others have to struggle with that, what that means. But the point being that at that point, if it were Miguel Estrada, who's a Honduran immigrant, supremely qualified, can't get a hearing now. It's not in Tom Daschle's best interest that Miguel Estrada get a hearing. He went to school here. If that happens, my father, who's a Mexican-American in California, will feel enormously proud of that accomplishment. And he won't be separated from Estrada by the fact that we're not Honduran. We're not Cuban. We're not Puerto Rican. I think outreach is really that bringing into the tent is the beginning of starting an agenda. Because once you break those barriers, it's going to resonate across the board.
Thank you, Ruben.
Trying to think whether I should disagree with him or whether I should say what I originally was thinking. Well, first of all, you beat me to the punch, but I think there are a lot of commonalities that we have, and that there can be a Latino agenda, a Hispanic agenda, a Chicano agenda. I don't know. You know, everywhere you go around the country, it's a different thing. And I think there are certain things that can fit very easily in there, even though one party or the other, or the Green Party, or who knows what party, might not feel as comfortable that it be there. And I believe that Antonia listed some of those. First and foremost, I think, is this whole issue of what makes us Hispanic. And when I look at it, I kind of make it the parallel of what makes a Jewish person Jewish. It's a culture that they belong to. It's a sort of grouping that they are. But the bottom line, it's about, in a sense, really their religion. And I think for Hispanics, it's really about the fact that what really connects us is this mother tongue, or somewhere in our family, this whole issue of our Spanish language. And I think that's why, in some ways, when people begin to attack our adherence to the Spanish language, or our desire to speak our language, that it's almost like attacking someone, if you would, on their religion. I mean, it's so basic to us as being Hispanic. And so I think one of the first issues up there is this whole issue of what do we do about Spanish in the Hispanic? And that's why I think this whole bilingual education or this English-only type of thing is really negative in our hearts when we feel our community being attacked about it. So one of the issues on there is, you know, how do we learn English but keep what makes us tied to our Hispanic roots, this issue of the Spanish language. Secondly, family reunification, or what makes us be families, wherever it is that we want to be. And that comes to this issue of immigration and how we treat it. And, you know, Ruben here talked about this outreach. You know, that's symbolic, and maybe that fools some people. But, you know, my big issue is there are some things that you can do that right away are the right thing to do. For example, I think Antonia should sit as the first Hispanic on the Supreme Court of the United States. Oh, that would be the right thing to do, regardless of party or whatever, because she has fought for these very issues that are important to us as a community. So I think I definitely think there's an agenda that we can all put together, Cuban American, Central American, Chilean, whatever. We can all come together and put them in line.
Thank you.
Can I respond?
About this, your nomination?
If nominated, she wasn't.
But, you know, and I think this is a wonderful discussion, but I do want to respond to this whole issue of the Supreme Court, and not as it applies to me. I do believe the symbolism is important. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. When the Supreme Court writes a decision, it's in black and white. And what I look at, okay, is how it applies to the issues that are important to my community. And the difficult issue is because of the fact that someone will be nominated that is a Latino or a Latina, that we as Latinos are sophisticated enough to look beyond that and to look at the substance of the issues. Because if we're going to put up a Latino or deal with a Latino agenda, unfortunately for Latinos, as much as we want to be diverse, we can't afford our diversity because the commonalities of poverty and deprivation and discrimination don't allow us to be as diverse as we want to be. And I do think that if there is a nomination, whether it's to the Supreme Court or whether it's to another important position, that we have to look beyond the symbolism. And we have to, as Latinos, look to see how that nomination will serve the interest of the community. And it has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. I mean, I fully believe that we as a community need to be competitive. Okay? I want Latinos in the Republican Party because that makes us relevant. Just as I want strong Latinos in the Democratic Party because it makes us relevant. And I think both parties have done us a disservice. So that, you know, this is not a blame or a benefit, it's just that we have to be analytical. We're at Harvard, very smart. The future leaders are sitting here out there in the audience, and we have to be self-critical and analytical of the issue and get beyond the outreach and get beyond the symbolism to the real issues that affect us.
I rest my case. That's why we need her there.
Okay, let me get some of those real issues on the table then. I was looking to my left and I noticed Antonio Villaraigosa is here, who is the former Speaker of the California Assembly, which also made me think of and seeing him made me think of Los Angeles, particularly as many of you talked about education and immigration and poverty as important issues for Latino. I was recently in Los Angeles, and think about this. LA County is larger than 42 states. Mm-hmm. There are more people living in Los Angeles County than 42 states in the country. There are elementary schools in LA County with 4,100 children in them. Many of those children lack health care, lack food. When I speak to principals and teachers there, they say they are being pressured to raise test scores for children who don't have eyeglasses who need them, for children who don't have a stable place to live. So several of you talked about education. We have a president with a slogan, "Leave no child behind," which is a great slogan. I'm wondering I'm wondering, how does, if you really look at a place like Los Angeles County, and I realize it's not your district, but it's nearby.
My sisters.
Sister district. What would this agenda have well, how would it speak to those conditions and to Latinos who live in LA?
Don't just look at LA.
Well, let's just start there.
Start in LA, start in Boston, start anywhere where you have a high concentration of Latinos, and you're going to find the same kind of situation. And the fact that people feel pressure to raise test scores for students who are in those conditions, think about that statement. The pressure is to give them the best education possible so that they can someday come to Harvard and have those kinds of advantages. There has to be some kind of accountability so that children have an opportunity, who live in the barrios of East LA, have an opportunity to compete in this economic system that we have in the United States of America. So I think it's not the complete and total answer, but having an education system with much more accountability than we have in it now is a very important part of the equation.
But just to push a little, the superintendents that I speak to, they say, we want to raise test scores, but if a child needs eyeglasses and can't read because they can't see the test even, who's going to help us with that?
Well, it's the responsibility, I think, of the entire community. I think you have the federal, state, local government, but you also have the nonprofit and the private sector that also need to participate in that. I mean, it's not, you can't say it's just the educator's problem in the classroom, obviously, or just that superintendent's problem. But you do have to put in accountability at any layer that you can. You can't just say because we don't have some resources that we're going to put accountability on the shelf.
Anyone else?
Well, I mean, the whole issue of educating our poor is a very important issue that's not unique to Latinos. And that's the other point that I would like to make. That Latinos, when you say what's good for the Latino agenda, has to also be what's good for the American agenda. And there's a heck of a lot of poor African Americans and poor whites. The real issue is the commitment of American society to public education and to educate all our children. Everyone that can leave public education behind and attend a private institution will do so because we care deeply about our children. But the fact of the matter is that recommitment to public education and accountability, of course everybody wants accountability. I mean, one of the biggest failures in the public education system is the dumbing of our community, that minorities, that African Americans and Latinos and other people of color aren't capable of learning. It's the poor little child syndrome. And yes, we want quality schools, and the issue is of investment, and it goes beyond. You can't educate a child that's hungry. You can't educate a child that's sick. It's not unique to Latinos, but it does impact Latinos because Latinos are the most urban population in this country. Over 85% of Latino are urban. The stereotype that we are farm workers, well, we're that too. And the whole issue of Los Angeles, let me tell you, the Southeast is the new Southwest. Okay? The number of Latinos in the Southeast is phenomenal. And let me just give you a couple of examples. Maldiv is opening an office in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? I went to Dalton, Georgia. Now, for you folks, Dalton, Georgia is the carpet capital of the United States. Okay? Over 50% of the students in the Dalton School District are now Mexicano Latinos. You go to Gainesville, Georgia, and I'm going to start speaking with a southern accent now, okay? Poultry capital, okay? Latinos, furniture, you name it. And the problem in the Southeast is that you're looking at working conditions. Someone said, and it's absolutely true, Latinos, Mexicanos specifically, have the largest worker participation of any group in the United States. We work like burros. We just don't get paid what we deserve. And so when you look at policies, and that's what you folks are looking into, solvable policies, okay? Living wage is a way to lift working people out of poverty. The earned income tax credit. Right? We have to look at our tax structure. We have to look at the structures within state, local, and federal government that keep poor people from being able to support themselves. So to me, from a policy perspective, is the support for public education and the economic policies of this country that do not fully recognize the contribution of the working poor.
Thank you. So that's, again, the question is getting this agenda to speak to those conditions in Los Angeles.
Well, as I said, it's nice to be back. Not just because of the laugh that the series of laughs that the Bush jab got. That was fun. Memory. I was here during the election. Still folks demanding a recount. But also, if we're talking about support for public education, probably right now is not the most opportune moment for me to declare my support for vouchers.
Good.
But a majority of Latinos do support vouchers. And one experience that I've had, a majority of Latinos do support vouchers. You heard it from Antonia, so it must be true now, right? It is true. I taught public school for 4 years. I was a public school teacher. When I graduated here the first time, I went back and I was a substitute teacher. Worked for $75 a day as a substitute teacher. And I taught in school districts that were 95% Latino. And you only need to do that for about 4 days, let alone 4 years, to figure out just how bankrupt the public school system is, based in large part because of huge level of low expectations harbored by mostly non-Latino teachers toward an increasingly Latino student body. Everybody got that. Mostly white teachers who don't expect much of mostly brown students. That's the way it is. That's the reality of what's going on. And in reality, that's why it gets me toward the support of vouchers. I think a majority of Latinos support vouchers for the same reason. Having said that, in terms of building this agenda at that level so it resonates, I remember one of the frustrating things about being here was that because, you should have figured it out from the title of the place, the Kennedy School of Government. Every time a policy discussion came up in a classroom, and every time a problem was identified, it always had the same solution: government. More government, bigger government, more efficient government. Let me say that I'm a fan of government in the right doses, doing the right things. There's a role for government. I think the biggest role for government is protecting the little guy against the big guy. Something I try to do on a daily basis in Dallas. I spend my days getting beaten up defending the little guy against the big guy. And you learn in the real world that it's very complicated. And sometimes it isn't always clear who the big guy is and who the little guy is. But the point is, on this level, I think what resonates best is not more government, not a government solution to most of these problems, but more grassroots activism coming up from the bottom. This is not laissez-faire. This is not Reagan saying, I'm done with this. I have no interest in poor people. That didn't resonate with me either. That left me flat. But when Bill Clinton stood up and said the era of big government is over, what he was trying to project was, if you think government can solve all your problems, you're fooling yourself. Government creates bureaucracies that live on and live on and live on, and suddenly it just becomes about supporting the bureaucracies. Don't take my word for it. Ask former senators, ask former congressmen, congresspeople. They'll tell you that it's much easier to create a government program than it is to kill it. And the reason, again, the reason I think the grassroots stuff resonates, if you haven't taken Marshall Gantz's course on grassroots activism, do it. The reason I think that stuff resonates is because it cuts through all that filler and all the government bureaucracy and says, what do people need and how do we get it to them? We have school districts in Dallas, schools in Dallas, where the per student ratio in terms of how much money they give is somewhere around $8,000. It's exceeding the state average. Guess what the worst public school district in the state of Texas is? Dallas Independent School District. The DC School District. Throw more money at the problem, the kids get worse. If you think government's the first stop solution, you're wrong. It's still about human beings doing grassroots work at the grassroots level, really effectively dealing with the problems.
Thank you. I'm tempted to ask a voucher question, but I'll hold on.
Well, I don't think government is the solution to problems in reality. I think government can help. I think it can create more of a level playing field. I certainly have seen a lot of government, and I didn't create it, and it was probably created by some white guys along the way, because they tend to still hold on to government. But, government can keep people in power who are in power. Whether it's, if there's a new business and the new business is smarter, brighter, faster, new technology or something than what's already in place, then the people who are already in place get their friends to put in regulations from government and, keep them in power and keep the new guy off the block. I mean, there are a lot of things that go on. This is all about power. And I think that power is very much hand in hand with money, especially here in the United States, but any country that I've seen. And so I would say that the answer for the Latino population, as I would say the answer is for poor people, is that we got to get our hands on money. I mean, we've got to get our hands on money. That's our basic
Think
problem.
about where she works. Listen to this woman. She knows what she's talking about.
We got to get our hands on money. And so there are certain ways to get our hands on money, but the biggest way to get our hands on money is that we need to create our own wealth. Latinos need to create their own wealth. I hear my colleagues talk about the digital divide. And you've probably heard that term too, and you probably think it's the fact that, inner city schools with Latinos and little African Americans and, white poor people, that these kids aren't getting their hands on the computer fast enough at age 6 or 7 or what have you. I don't think the digital divide is that at all. I think the digital divide is that, high-tech companies aren't owned by Latinos. Not enough of us. Or by women. Or that, big public companies like Enron aren't run by a Latino or a woman. I think that we need to understand that we need to get our hands on money. Wealth creation, I call it, and there's certain ways to do it. In my book, there's, make your own company, which we do very well. But then we can't get our hands on money to grow it bigger. So how do we get our hands on money? Or get a good education at Harvard so you can be the CEO at the big public company and decide how the money and the jobs are given out. That's how we create wealth. And when we get wealth, then the next step is we need to put it back in our own community and bring our community up. So, no, government can help. Nonprofits can help. They can get the record straight. They can push the judiciary to do the right thing, bring the case before people. We can put in policies that try to figure out how we get venture capital into our community. But the biggest place where we make the difference is we got to decide that we want to make money and we want to invest money in our own community. And when we do that, we make America better, by the way. That's how we do it. So no, government's not the solution. It can help. But business and our own initiative is the biggest solution to the problem.
Sounds good. You're right. I like that better.
Okay, I'm still
Write
thinking.
a column.
I'm still thinking about L.A. and I met with.
On days like today, yeah.
They would like some of that money, I think, down there. But
Let me try to answer that question.
okay, because just part of what because what I'm reacting was a little bit of a disconnect, I think.
Yeah.
Because what I heard from nonprofits who I met with is we don't have the resources to serve this tremendous need. We are seeing great neglect of children that we can't possibly begin to respond to. And guess what? Although they would love...
When we don't have the resources, what do they mean?
It means...
we don't have the money.
We don't have the money. So, but with respect to the
If people had
vouchers...
the money, they could go buy the kid eyeglasses. You wouldn't need government to do it for them.
And with respect to the vouchers, I think that while many would readily choose to leave, and I don't dispute at all the idea that many people would support vouchers, the question is, who will take them, right? Are there private schools out there just waiting for these poor Latinos to educate them? So I guess the question, I want to talk about the resonance between this agenda we're talking about and people who live with these conditions every day.
Well, the whole issue of education is so contentious, so controversial, and it's so either one or the other, which in reality it isn't. The reality is that public education, and one of the legitimate roles of public education is to educate the public But that doesn't mean that it is the sole role or the only. Vouchers has a place. Charter schools have a place. Okay, choice is important. MALDF is about choice. We're not in concept opposed to vouchers. It's the type of voucher that sometimes is not the solution. Okay, we are in support of charter schools, but in LA. First of all, the problem in LA is that the people who handle the purse strings are in Sacramento. That's number one. Okay? Whether it's LA County, and remember, LA County has 68 cities within that county with that many school districts. Okay? So your LAUSD is just one of the 68 school districts. But for all intents and purposes, we say public education or education is a local issue. But the policies are being made at the state and at the federal government. I mean, I say this as a compliment, we have an education president who cares deeply about education. Okay? But the acknowledgement is that the amount of money that comes from Washington is a nickel because it is not perceived to be the domain of the federal government to be involved in education. It is a local state issue. So number one, that's it. Secondly, the way public education is funded is totally out of whack. It has been out of whack, and all of you who have studied and are studying the issue of public education know that that's the problem. It is based on property values and property taxes. And nobody really wants to take responsibility. And we're going to have to deal with the issue of who's responsible for paying for public education. Not who's making the policies. And there should be a disconnect between paying for public education at the state level and what happens at the local level, which is a local issue. Now, in LA County or the city of LA, let's talk about LAUSD. We called the Catholic Archdiocese. Okay, let's get to the bottom line, okay? And call, how many seats do you have available? Because they're closing Catholic schools in inner cities, okay? How many people can you accommodate? 750,000 students in the LAUSD. The total of the LA County Archdiocese, which is much bigger than LA County, is 290,000 students total. So how many do they have left? Okay? And let me tell you why Latinos can resonate to vouchers. Okay? Remember, Latinos, once again, what brings us together, what makes us Latinos. My dad and my mom, okay, brought us when we were small. There's 7 of us. Okay? The first 4 of us, they couldn't afford to send us to Catholic school. So we went to public school. I am the product of an LA school. Okay? As soon as they could save a dime, they sent my younger siblings to Catholic school. Why? Because to them, education is more than just reading and writing. It's about values. It's about right and wrong. And to them, that's what education is, and that's where they put their money. Are they opposed to public education? No. 4 of my sisters teach at a public education. So when we talk about what can be done, it's not that simple. It's dealing with funding. It's dealing with giving parents choices. I have a choice. I can choose to send my kid to whatever school I want to. Most Latinos don't, okay? So when we really talk about choice, let's talk about whether it's an empty promise or a reality. A lot of you, this resonates with your family, whether you had the funds to go or not to go. And the thing about Loretta, money, yes, it's okay for Latinos to want to be filthy rich. There's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing,
about time.
There's nothing wrong with wealth, and there's nothing wrong with power. It's how you exercise power and how you use wealth that's important. And I think that Latinos is part of the evolution. We have evolved from, I chose to be a public interest lawyer. I had a choice, okay? Nobody forced me there. I could have gone and made money. And there's nothing wrong with making money. It's a choice I had. It's a choice that many of us should have.
Well, you talk about power and money, and if you were really objective and sat back and say, how is this very powerful institution, many of them across the country, known as public education, how is it serving the Latino community? How is it serving Latino young boys and girls? And for most Latino boys and girls, it is not serving them well. I mean, most people objectively could look at it. If you look at graduation rates, again, rates of being accepted to four-year institutions, public education in the United States today is not serving the Latino community very well.
I agree.
So we need to find ways to change it. And just recently, with Senator Kennedy, the president passed a bipartisan bill that looked at what was the most important thing from that perspective: accountability. What gets measured gets done. If you measure the achievement gap and say, why are Latino kids in LA not graduating at the same rate as other kids, then you can actually do something about it. If you say, next year we're going to try to graduate X number more, or move kids up more, focusing on reading and all. Federal government doesn't pay a nickel, it pays a nickel and 2 pennies. I mean, the federal government really does pay relatively little in terms of public education. It's mainly the responsibility of state and local government. But what the federal government did is say that nickel and 2 pennies is going to be tied to accountability. And imagine if you took the rest of that dollar, state and local, and said, we're going to tie all of our money to accountability. What gets measured gets done. You might actually make some changes. But I don't think anyone in this room can argue that the public education, institutions of public education, have served the Latino community well. Overall, there are fabulous success stories, but most of the stories
I would tend to
not
disagree
good.
with you.
Well,
I would tend to disagree with you. I think there are a lot of problems in public education, but public education serves about 93, 94% of the people across the United States.
and it could do a better job of serving Latinos.
And it could do a better job of serving Latinos. It could do a better job of serving Anglos. It could do a better job of serving African Americans. But by and large, guess what? Over 90% of the people in the United States get a public school education. And you know, we're the most competitive society around. We, are economically our strong horse in the world. We still have our democracy being held together after 200 plus years. So to some extent, we are doing some things correctly in educating our people. One of the problems I see is that we as a nation agree that we should provide a public education to every person. In fact, we force people off the farms to come and to be in the classroom. We used to have truancy people who used to go out and pull them off the farm when the parents said they needed to be making a nickel an hour or whatever, and we brought them into the classroom because we understood the need to educate our population. What we didn't do is a very basic thing. We didn't say at what level we were really committed to that education. And that comes back to this property funding and how some schools have a lot of money and some schools, because they're in a poor area, have a lower amount of money. What we didn't say was, you Latino poor kid have the right to the same type of education as that young lady over there who lives in Palos Verdes, California, and goes to a top-notch public education school because they have money. And until we are willing to sit back and say something about how things from a money perspective have to be equal for each and every person that we intend to send to public education, we are going to have that kind of disparity.
There ought to be a law.
You're right. We should have a constitutional amendment that allows me to say, I'm not getting the school, the public school that I'm getting, and I'm going to go after you until you give me the public school education I want. That's the only thing we understand in this United States.
Ruben.
Very quickly, let me say, link together 2 points. But they talked about public school choice being an empty choice, or a voucher choice being an empty choice, if they aren't the schools out there to service all those kids. Makes sense to me. And like most things that are empty, they can get filled up pretty quickly. And I think that one thing that will happen, and this is already, I think, in the works, happening, in the Latino community, you'll have a series of entrepreneurs who will go out and start Latino schools, Latino charter schools. It's already happening to some degree. It'll happen in greater degree in that kind of a program. Don't underestimate, we talked about power and money and all these common themes, and it's true. Don't underestimate the power of the entrepreneurial spirit at work in the Latino community. If there aren't existing schools, the Catholic Church can't take them all, great. Go build 100 schools run by Latinos, teaching a curriculum, and those Latino parents can go there. They're homeschooling, they're doing everything else. Now, that's got to be an option. Let me make the connection in this way. There's one group of people out there that get this. I have a lot of faith, love, and affection, devotion to the Latino community, and a great amount of it I can trace to immigrants. To immigrants. You can't talk about a Latino agenda, you can't talk about the Latino community without dealing with immigrants. It might be tempting in a place like this and in the world in which I run to talk about it from the point of view of an assimilated Mexican American who's been here for 3 generations. But that misses the whole story. If Mexican Americans stopped for a minute, went out and talked to immigrants, interacted with immigrants, and followed the model of immigrants, they'd be much better off. Because the immigrants have it right, just like the immigrants have always had it right. The longer immigrants stay in the US, the more corrupted they become. They begin to look for outs, they begin to yell racism, they begin to take the easy way out, they begin to look to government for all their solutions. But somewhere in Los Angeles, in that neighborhood you talked about, and in Phoenix, and in Dallas, there's a guy in a restaurant, his 5th. Now, there's a guy running a clothing store, his 4th. I'm not telling the panel anything, they know these people as well. And these people they're the epitome of the American ideal. They don't rush to government for all the solutions. They don't cry racism when they don't get their way. They have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they are the backbone of this country, as they always have been. I don't worry a whole lot, frankly, about Mexican immigrants. I worry a great deal about Mexican Americans. I think they're in trouble. I've taught them both. I've taught their kids in public schools, and those Mexican kids come there for business. They're respectful to the teacher. They do their homework. The Mexican American kid does not, in many cases. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it's turned out. So again, the immigrant model is not something I think we want to stray from. It's something we want to learn from.
It's an interesting point, given that the way it's worked for other immigrants is that the longer you're here, the better off you do. And what you're suggesting is
Hasn't worked out that way for us.
Assimilation may actually be bad for your health for Latinos. But we won't go there now. Let's talk about, if there's an agenda, there must be leadership for this agenda. So where's this leadership going to come from? We know that both the Democratic and Republican Party are competing for the Latino vote. Some thoughts about leadership, about political organization, and then if you can be brief on this one, we're going to open it up to the audience to participate.
Well, it needs to come from the community. I mean, you need to have community leaders who are running for office, who are running businesses, who are running nonprofits. I mean, it needs to come from the community, and you're seeing more of it because there is a larger Latino community, a larger community that is 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation that is successful, that is coming into place. Loretta, now you have Loretta's sister. You have a number of...
Same generation.
Same generation, yeah. You just have an opportunity. You have the young people here who will be leaders in just a few short years. So literally, you just have more numbers of Latinos and Latinas who are going to be in positions of leadership.
Does it matter that amongst those many leaders, there's not a common vision, that there's not a common, because we're talking about an agenda, which suggests coherence, right? And strategy.
Well, I don't know if we ever agreed on that.
Okay.
I think,
so not a coherent agenda.
Yeah, I'm not big into coherent agendas. I think that I think the strength of our nation is based on the individual responsibility, individual initiative, and obviously there's an affinity and I think strong support for the Latino community with many Latinos, and I think that's important. But I think it's our individual strength that really creates the opportunity for initiative, where you have groups like MALDEF who are supporting larger issues on a legal platform. I think that's great. But in the end, Loretta is the point person because she has to be up for election, and she's the one elected. She needs a lot of people to support her. It's not Loretta alone, but you need the individual to stand up and say, I'm going to take leadership, and I'm going to put my name on the ballot, or I'm going to start my own company. That doesn't mean it's just the individual doing it. There's obviously a tremendous amount of support behind that individual.
Well, I'm very optimistic for our community. I see the emergence of a whole group of what I call the younger generation. the folks that have been educated at Harvard, at Yale, at Berkeley, at UCLA, and throughout the country. And, you know, whether we sort of, I've been around for 25 years, so I guess, you know, the oldies but goodies. You know, there is an agenda, there is an affinity. And what I like about the future is that I am seeing the growth of, and the entrance of Latinos in corporate America, in business, in the public sector, in the non-for-profit sector. There's this diversity of looking at the world and saying, yes, I can be the president of IBM. I can be the president of a foundation, of a major corporation. I can be president of the United States. I can be the governor. And to me, that's the enlightening thing, that we have divergent views. Of course we will. But I'll tell you something, and unfortunately, it has not been eliminated in American society. It's not so much Latinos who want to self-identify. It's just that we're forced to identify because there's still the level of discrimination. There is that level of exclusion of differences. And as wonderful as this institution is, just look at the number of Latinos. And you, among the audience who are Latinos, how often are you asked about your community, the misunderstanding, the stereotypes? There's so much learning that can be done. However, what I do see in my community is that the educated folks that want to run for office, that want to do different things, going back home. Because let me tell you something, Ruben, it is about individual, but what both Democrats and Republicans don't understand about the Latino community is basically this, that we're a communal community. We're tied to family, we're tied by language, we're tied by roots, okay? And yes, the Republicans are right. We're entrepreneurial. Yes, I'm the immigrant. I sold tamales, on the streets. I sold fruits on the street. Yeah. You give us a corner and we'll sell whatever, okay? We're entrepreneurial, that's right, okay? And we're about taking care of ourselves. We're not about depending on government. We are the largest community that are dependent on the private sector employment. We're not a public sector employment community, okay? So that's right, but we're also very communable. We're about not only our dad and our mom, but our tia, our cousin, the neighbor, taking care of community. And that's what resonates to us. And I will tell you, it is the immigrant that is re-energizing American society. And it's not just Latino. It's the Asian immigrant, the one from India, from Korea, from Afghanistan, you name it. Those are the people that are re-energizing America. And those are the ones that bring in, the thoughts, the hunger, whether it be in our politics or economics. So I'm very enthused, and I think that our political evolution is such that, yeah, we're struggling to find our place. But the fact of the matter is that in our evolution, we're going to do okay. And going back to public education, it's not just to teach us about reading and writing. It's about to teach us about what makes us an American. And that is the communal forum in American society that brings us together. And that's why we have an investment in public education together with public and private and everything else. But there's a specific role, and we Americans need to recommit to public education.
Quick story, if the question's about which party leads us there, I guess.
Well, and leadership generally.
How is leadership formed? My answer to the first question was leadership, grassroots leadership from the bottom up. But in terms of the political party, I don't have a stake in it one way or the other. I don't get a commission from the Republican Party for every person I sign up. I don't get a kickback from every part of the Democratic Party. I'm not...
But I want to know why you said commission versus kickback.
Whatever. I have no stake. I'm an equal opportunity offender. Ask anybody.
As long as it's not soft money, we're okay.
On any given day, I might poke at this side or that side. And the point is, I don't have an interest in the Latino community belonging to either group wholesale. I want the Latino community to be wined and dined, to be courted, to be addressed, to be respected, just like all other groups are, not just the money groups, not just the PACs, not just the special interests, but like Loretta said, the people who show up in the door and they get a meeting and they get respeto. And I think the way you do that is by being in play, constantly in play. The Latino community is in play. 35% of them went for Bush last time around. Bush now has a higher approval rating among Latinos than he does in the mainstream, which is saying a lot, given that his approval rating in the mainstream is about 82%. I think he'll do better than 35% in 2004. Having said all that, the community should be in play because that's where the power is. That's where the negotiation happens. Recently, I was in Texas, and I went to go speak to a group of ranchers. I live a fun life, let me tell you. It was a ranchers association. They were a little suspicious because I said, "Hi, my name is Ruben Navarrate, and I'm a Mexican-American. I like my hyphen." And these mostly white ranchers were looking at me like, "Who let this guy in here?" And they had just committed to the Republican candidate for governor, not gotten anything in response, not asked for anything in return. They just handed over their endorsement. After the speech, a couple of them came up to me and told me how unhappy they were with their governor. I said, "He's a Republican governor. You just endorsed him without him even asking for it. And now you're telling me you're unhappy with him because he hasn't done a damn thing for you." I have a question. Why'd you endorse him? Well, because we always endorse Republicans. You know, we always endorse him. He's our guy. If the Democratic Party and the Latinos make the same mistake in reverse, where they constantly give their votes away without having them first be earned, then I think we're in real trouble. I want them wined and dined and courted to and respected.
Well, I don't know that the question was about Republicans or Democrats, but if you've ever heard me talk, you will know that being a Democrat that I am, I still think, thank God there are Republican Hispanics or Hispanic Republicans, I don't know what, Hispanic Republicans, I guess, because, they're working within that system to try to make things happen, and hopefully they're working on an agenda that I would agree would be good for Hispanics and therefore would be good for America. But back to the point of leadership. I'm one of those persons that believes that leadership is taught. I have an example right here. It's not that I don't love you men, but I love to see strong women, and Antonia is a strong woman. And she told you that she came here from Mexico young, but I know that there was somebody in her family, probably her mom or grandmother, her tia Chola, or whoever it would be, right, who was a strong role model for her. And so maybe she didn't have a, Harvard leadership class that she took to be where she is, but she had a Harvard-type role model in her own family, showing her through example how you get things done. So I think that she learned her leadership skills. Now, she said she's excited to see all these prepared young people in our community. I'm excited too, because hopefully you get to see the Antonias and you get to see your mothers or your grandmothers, or the strong women for the young ladies, and maybe for the men it's the women in the family or the guys in the family. You get to see what she and I got to see so we would be leaders, but you also get to come to Harvard and the Yales and the other places, and you take leadership classes that Maldiff and other people put on in your own communities, and you're prepared. You are the future of the Latino community here in the United States. You have role models, whether it's from your family or from people like us, and you have this incredible preparation where you get taught how to be leaders. So am I excited about that? Absolutely. That is the leadership of our future. And it's as well prepared as any other group of people in the United States. And I think that's why Antonia is excited to see it. And, I see it in my sister. We're only 10 years apart. Now, Antonia and I are probably a little bit apart in age, not very many years. But she came here, but look, she came here born somewhere else. She's done an incredible job. She's a leader. She's a role model for me. But she, picked tomatoes or sold things on the street or whatever she said, right? I didn't have to do that. I got to go to school. I got to get my MBA. I got to be an investment banker. I got to make money. Then I went into the public sector. But I see my sister. She went to Berkeley. She went to UCLA Law. She worked in public advocate. I paid for her education. Like some of you are getting paid for your education somewhere along the way, And that's why 10 years earlier, she gets to come to Congress. And we expect big things out of her, bigger and better than what I can deliver. And that's why we're excited, because we have developed that kind of leadership, and you are that leadership.
Okay, thank you. They're lining up to here with questions. So why don't we start on the left, and we'll alternate left to right to get a few questions to the panel. And I'll just ask the questioners to be brief and ask real questions, and to ask the panelists to be brief in responses so we can get several.
Okay. My name is Roger, and I'm from Georgia, so where Whitfield County has 20% Latinos. I'm just curious about the vouchers issue. I just want to give a quick personal, and that is that I'm the product of public education. I have an undergraduate degree from a public school in Georgia, and neither of my parents ever went to college. My dad started working in a warehouse 3 days after he graduated high school. So the reason that I'm against vouchers is because what happens to people whose parents are described like that? Good, hardworking people, but they don't know what school to put me in. I mean, if my parents had had a choice, I would have been in the poor school and someone else would have been in the good school. So I think that vouchers ducks the real issue, which is that every student needs to have the ability to go to a good school. Mm-hmm. So can you respond to that, and how can you ensure, to me, again, vouchers ducks the real question, which is how do we ensure every student in the United States is able to go to a good school, not just the people whose parents know which school to send them to.
It's all a learning curve, isn't it? The older ones, well, we don't have as, we are the trial babies. The younger ones, like my sister, they get all the positives of having gone through the trial and error. The answer is we've got to be more effective as a community to go out and let people know they should be here instead of, opting to drop out of high school. I mean, part of it is our relationship to you and your relationship to our community.
Maybe one of the voucher advocates could just comment on that one.
I think the real issue isn't, part of the real issue would be is every child get a good education, or as you put it, go to a good school. I think the real issue is how you get there, and in that regard, it's about accountability. And it was talked about earlier, if public schools were more accountable, sensitive, more respectful of parents as consumers and clients than they are, then I would be less enthusiastic in my support of vouchers. I don't go to my support of vouchers first and foremost. I go there as last resort, given what I saw in public schools, what I've done in covering it for 10 years. Every time there's a public school reform, teachers' unions fight it tooth and nail, like their life depended on it. Merit pay, longer school years, year-round school, whatever. I come from a whole family of teachers, and I have never been to a Christmas dinner yet when my aunt didn't, bless her heart, didn't complain, about the kids, they don't pay me enough money, and there's no accountability. If she worked in a widget factory and they turned out widgets that didn't work, she wouldn't have a job anymore. Every other industry has to be accountable for what they do. And until you instill accountability, I'm willing to pay teachers 5 times as much money if they give me a student that's 5 times the value they give me now. But I want the flip side of that. If you give me a kid who graduates from high school and can't read his diploma, I take your pension away.
Let me answer, the whole, number one, public education in urban areas is broken, and it has to be fixed, okay? And we need to get that out on the table. Our kids in poor urban communities that are going to public education need and are entitled to a better quality education. What we observe as looking at education and reforming education is that for many folks that support vouchers is seen as a mechanism to force competition and to force public education to improve itself. And that is putting aside a particular issue with Latinos, is that if Latinos could, many, not all, would send their kids to private school because of the value system that is instilled in many Latinos. I think what's happening right now is that the issue of charter schools and vouchers is that the concept gets lost because of the political competition in the whole issue of support for public education. And let me tell you something. I work for a not-for-profit, Malda, okay? We're about to build a high school in LA that wasn't completed. We a group of Latinos have taken on themselves to build Belmont High School and complete Belmont High School, which is a $100 million venture, because the public institutions wouldn't do it. So when you look at this whole issue, and you're absolutely right, your parents, my parents didn't have a choice, okay? So how do we make sure that we get a quality education? But getting beyond that, keep in mind the debate about how do we fix public education, and that vouchers and charters are but one of the slice of the possible solutions to how do we educate the kids in the United States.
I want to mention just one thing quickly.
Okay. 'Cause you see, we have a lot of
number one, I'm a supporter of public education. My children, we send to public schools because we believe in public education. But where in education in the United States do we do a good job? In elementary level, there are good public schools, public school systems, districts. But again, for the Latino community, overall, we're failing at a 50% dropout rate. That's failure. Where are we doing well? At the university level, because there's competition. You can decide where to go. You can decide it's competitive to get into different schools. Competition is not a bad thing, and somehow inserting competition, and competition implies accountability as well, into the elementary school, secondary school system, we think is a good thing. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'm going to move on there.
Thank you.
My name is Maria. I'm a master's student at the education school here. And my question in regards to the Latino agenda is in terms of the war that we are in right now. And there seems to be a lack of leadership among Latino leaders in terms of taking a critical stance against this war that is not only abroad affecting people of color in a negative way, but also in this country, there's been INS raids justified by the New Patriots Act. And I feel like this is a really good opportunity to be critical of the contradictions in this system of it being a capitalist democracy fueled by white supremacy, and an opportunity to build alliances with other people of color who have faced similar issues in this country of being affected and left at the economic bottom of a system that is perpetuated by capitalism. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what is the Latino agenda when it comes to the war?
Overwhelmingly, enthusiastically in favor of it. That's the definable, detectable agenda.
Also, what your own view is my question.
Enthusiastically, definably in favor of it. This isn't like, I mean, you know the story. This isn't the debate we used to have in the 80s about whether we should go into Central America or not. This is what happens when you get attacked. When they come to your house and kill your people on your soil, and what you do about it, and how that defines your role. You won't find any member of Congress. You won't find this member of Congress. You won't find any.
I voted against the Patriot Act, by the way.
You didn't vote against the Authorization of Use of Force Act, did you?
That's because he's already guaranteed by the Constitution that right anyway.
You don't have to. I was proud of you for that.
He already had those powers.
You did the right thing. The point being that this is a community that has a very strong patriotic streak, and this is a community that has bled and died on foreign beaches in World War II, in Korea and Vietnam. If you go to the Vietnam Memorial, look at the names. 20% of those names are Latinos.
But I think the question is not so much about support of the war or not, but about INS and the protection of civil liberties.
That was an aspect of it, but her question was a very good one. It was about where's the Latino leadership moral outrage against the war, in essence. Correct, right? And my
how
answer
it's affecting our community here.
It's not out there. I'll give you one little short story. I used to get this piece of mail from a guy who's a reactionary white male who's concerned in Dallas because there's so many Mexicans moving into his neighborhood. Not unusual. I get a lot of mail from people like that. And it usually ends with, go back to Mexico. But he was angry as time went on. Then September 11th happened. And I got all of this anti-immigrant mail. A couple days went by and he sent me another piece of mail. He said, listen, I want to tell you a story. There was a Latino in my neighborhood who used to drive me crazy because he used to drive his car through town and he had a Mexican flag on the back of his car. You know, and I was angry with him. He wouldn't assimilate. Why wouldn't he want to be American? You know, blah, blah, blah. September 11th happens. The Mexican guy takes down the Mexican flag and puts up the American flag. Okay? The racist calls me back and says, okay, I made a mistake. I judged this person incorrectly. I never heard from him again. It's a complicated, the story indicates that you have this complexity in the Latino community. You have Congressional Medal of Honor winners, you have Green Berets, and you have people who take down the Mexican flag and put up the American one. And those people are all part of the Latino agenda. So if I'm the Latino leader, the one and only, and I'm going to reflect the Latino perspective on the war, don't I have to take into account all those people as well?
Well, I would just like to say, and very short, because I'm
Okay.
I sit as the ranking woman in the House of Representatives on the Defense Committee. So I get to do a lot of defense. I come from Southern California, which is a big defense area. I come from a place with a lot of retired veterans and with veterans. And yes, the Hispanics are very patriotic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I will tell you that if you look at the Hispanics in the Congress, we have certainly taken stances about how this is affecting our community. If you look at the way we voted on the Patriot Act, for example, you'll see many of us were, of the 66 Democrats in the House of Representatives who voted against it, many of our Hispanics were there because we understand the impact it has on our community. We also go back and we talk to our communities and we understand how it impacts us. We're also coming back and we're always trying to do legislation that will, take into account what they're doing, what they're doing towards us. But if you also look, for example, at issues that deal with the military right now, when the military is so strong and powerful and all the money's going there, et cetera, we take our stances where we need to take our stances. The Puerto Ricans and some of us are still fighting the whole issue of Vieques. I mean, we have not stopped doing what we need to do, even though we get hate mail that says, how could you not allow our troops to train in Vieques if it's the only place that they possibly have and you're putting our boys at risk? The fact of the matter is they're putting people at risk, people without a voice in the Congress, and we're going to fight for them. So you have a lot of leadership fighting on behalf of the way this war and the policies that this administration and others are implementing that affect us in a negative way. You have it there. You just have to call up and ask us, and I'll give you a long list of the real things that we're doing. We're not silent on it, even though it's not, it's not nice to vote against the Patriot Act in these days.
I'm being told there's another one, so we're going to go, why don't you go here and then we'll come around.
My name is Bill McCamley. I'm from New Mexico. I'm a first-year Kennedy School student. In my state, in New Mexico, there's been a lot of integration politically among Anglos and Hispanics for a long length of time. And in fact, both gubernatorial frontrunners now, Bill Richardson and John Sanchez, are both Hispanic. However, you still see among the Hispanic population in New Mexico a lower voter turnout than you do amongst the Anglos, even in my state where there's a lot of Latino-Hispanic activism politically. In the United States as a whole, I'm sure that's even lower. How do you raise Latino voting rates and get Latinos to buy into the system more so that you can take more power politically as a group and push a coherent Latino agenda?
In many ways, you have more Latino candidates. That helps to drive more participation, more interest, and you talk about issues that are relevant to Latinos. And I think that you're starting to see that. You're starting to see an increase in voter participation by the Latino community. But I think it does drive, if you look in Texas at the gubernatorial primary, I think if you look around Antonio's race in LA, you put Latinos on the ballot, Latinos step up to run, that does help Latino voter turnout.
It was always thought, you raise a very important point, and it's a major frustration, point of frustration I think for all of us. We would all love to be able to wave a wand and get Latinos participating in greater numbers. Having said that, it used to be that, for instance, one party or the other would wonder, gee, we sent this guy up here and he ran, and then the Latinos didn't turn out. So they're apathetic, they don't care, whatever. Think about the guy that they put up. Think about the guy. Think about how that person crafted a message and whether or not that message resonated with the Latino community. If you send forward a white Democrat who doesn't have a Latino consciousness, who doesn't even think of Latinos, who still thinks in terms of black and white, and he doesn't get the Latino vote, big surprise. Same thing true for a white Republican. Same thing true for a white Republican. In Dallas and in Texas, I'm happy to report that in Texas, in the primary just last month, there was a record set, the largest Hispanic turnout ever in the state of Texas. Because you had an exciting gubernatorial race between Tony Sanchez and Dan Morales, two Latinos battling it out for the Democratic nomination. What Latinos said was, you want us to vote? Give us something to vote for. Don't keep sending us this crap. These uninspiring candidates who don't take stands and then come and complain to me about how I didn't vote. If you give me some excitement, you know, this race was full of issues, it was hot and heavy, I'll turn out and vote. It's not complicated.
Question here.
Thanks. My name is Jessica. I'm an undergrad freshman, and I find this question is mostly for Mr. Morales as an advisor to state and local governments. I find it troubling, but not really surprising, that we've talked for an hour about education and no one has mentioned the juvenile justice system. I tutor a couple times a week at juvenile hall. I see 18-year-olds on a routine basis that still can't read. The people who come out of these institutions have a tremendous impact on the Latino community. But I feel like just because politicians can't do photo ops with inmates, and it's an unpolitically popular it's an unpopular issue to address for most mainstream politicians, it's being completely ignored. What recommendations are you making to state governments to change education systems within juvenile detention centers, and also to provide alternatives either at the county or state level?
Well, when I was elected to the County Board of Supervisors, I was on the Juvenile Justice Commission there. And now in looking at education, one of the most fundamental things you have to understand is, number one, is it's not, those are our kids. They're mainly Latino and Hispanic kids that are in those juvenile detention centers. Secondly, a lot of them aren't at grade level in terms of reading or in terms of math. And, you know, I think the same thing applies in terms of the accountability system in the public education system. You've got to give these people the tools so that they can be successful and be inspired to do other things. And you're right, there hasn't been a lot of talk, Loretta might know more than I, in Washington about juvenile detention centers and how to educate those kids. But my focus would be on teaching them basics in terms of education so that they can have a chance while they're still young.
Well, just because we can't take photo ops at a juvenile delinquency area or whatever hall, juvenile hall, I will let you know that on Thursday, was that yesterday? Wednesday of this week, I was at the juvenile hall with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, talking to them, you know, about this very issue. Before that, I was in an apartment complex that we have now that puts foster kids, who once they turn 18, by the way, are given $50 and out the door, and, you know, they've been shuttled between 22 families in their life or whatever. So just because we don't take photo ops with them, because you need to protect the child, remember these are children, and most of them they can't sign releases, they don't have parents to sign releases, or, you know, can't do that. It doesn't mean that some of us aren't working on that issue. So first is an understanding of what's happening out there. Second, realize that most of these type of what we call general welfare issues are not handled at the federal level. They're handled at the state level. I mean, that really is the jurisdiction of all of that. That's why, as a county supervisor, you dealt with that issue. But that doesn't mean that we're not constructing legislation in the Congress or resolutions to pass about what we think should be happening. The fact of the matter is, I don't control the House of Representatives. That legislation never sees the light of day because our chairmen don't want to take it up. It's not a sexy thing to talk about. You know, delinquents are not a sexy thing to talk about, nor is their education. And in most states, several states, let's say about a third of them or so, anybody who's had a felony can't even vote. So most politicians in a lot of states couldn't even care about these type of people.
I skipped this corner over here, so we'll go to here. I think we have a chance for one or two more questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Margaret Dongo, and I'm a mid-career student, and I happen to be a politician. I've been 10 years in Parliament. And my question, actually, I'm directing it to the Congresswoman. She did mention that the most important thing to address the imbalance, if I may say, is that the Latinos have to get their hands where money is. And my question is, how can you get your hands where money is when there is such an imbalance? How can you get your hands where money is when the people are not educated, when the playing field is not leveled? That's the first question. The second question is, I want to believe that you are a Latino, and the reason for them voting you, even with or without money, is that probably they are the largest majority, and I respect them for that. And what are you doing as a Congresswoman to make sure that the agenda of education is put in Congress? Is it not a right to have education? Is it a privilege as far as LA is concerned? Is Los LA not part of America? If not, what is the role of federal government vis-a-vis correcting the imbalances when it comes to education and other essential things, important areas? Thank you.
At the federal level, at a national level, it's a requirement that you have an education. I mean, that's really the way that we've defined the role of education. That's why we have public education. But again, it comes back to that. You can say that you must have a public education. What we haven't defined is what kind of public education do you really get? And that's that whole issue of money and where you live and property taxes, the fact that it's done at the state level. Philosophically, of course, there's a big difference between, not all, but in a majority, between the two parties that are in the Congress with respect to the federal role in education. I mean, I sit on the Education Committee. We have the problem that philosophically, most of the people in the other party do not believe we should even be talking about education. Come on, they tried to abolish the Department of Education at the federal level about 7 or 8 years ago. They tried to abolish Head Start, you know, at the same time.
That was at different administrations.
I'm just saying that that this was the Congress led by the other party. There is a philosophical difference. You have only to look at those committee minutes to see that we fight this battle every single day with respect to education. Then you're asking me, what are you doing to preserve education? We have many initiatives, and we've actually gotten some of them in this education bill that we got the president to go along with, to the detriment of some. I mean, the biggest fight was trying to find enough votes because the Republicans in the Congress were so upset that we were trying to do things like Hispanic dropout, like TRIO programs, like reaching back into the 8th grade to start to teach our kids the right curriculum they need in order to make them successful to get through high school so they can get into a university. There is a lot that we are doing with respect to that. I just don't control the Congress. If I did, you'd see my name on that. You know, you'd see the Sanchez education bill, and you would know exactly where I was on that. Right now, you have to look through, the 30th speaker on the committee is Sanchez. I have to wait for 29 other people to speak about this thing before I ever get to. By that time, the whole audience is gone. Or I have to submit my questions or my comments in writing. And how often do you all look up to see what I said in Education Committee last week about something on Hispanics? You don't. That's why you don't see it. You know, I'm not the president. I'm not the leader in the Congress. I don't hold the reins of power. And you had a first question, but I can't remember what it was.
You know what? I think we need to take that one in the reception.
Okay.
I've been told we're out of time. I want to thank our distinguished panel. I think the discussion was very engaging and addressed many important issues.
Thank you very much.
I want to apologize to those of you who are waiting to pose a question, but I think there'll be time afterwards in the reception just behind the screen. Thank you.